What is a risk? A risk is any known or unknown event that can affect your project's outcome, for better or for worse. Mostly, the risk impacts your projects negatively. But then there are some risks which create opportunities as well in the projects. Today in this video, I'll talk about most common project risks. Then we'll talk about how do we manage risks in the projects. And then finally, we'll talk about the differences between risk management in Agile projects and risk management in Waterfall projects. Most common project risks are cost-related risk, schedule-related risk, staffing-related risk, performance-related risk, strategy-related risk, market changes-related risk, operational risks, legal risks, external hazard risks. How do we manage the risk? The risk management is a 4-step process in any project. The first step is risk identification, where we identify the risk in any of the planned or unplanned discussions or meetings. The next step is risk assessment, where we determine the impact of the risk and probability of occurrence of the risk. And from these two factors, we calculate a risk rating. So higher the risk rating, more impactful the risk. Then the next step is risk response planning, where we come up with a strategy to address the risk. And the last step in the process is risk response execution, where we execute the strategy which was determined in the previous step. So these are the 4 steps in the risk management process. Now let's talk about all these 4 steps one by one in detail. The first step in the process is risk identification. In any of the discussion where we identify a risk, we document the title of the risk, a description of the risk, and who is going to own the risk. Then the next step is risk assessment. In this step, we determine the impact of the risk. If this risk occurs, then how this is going to impact the project. We can define the impact in terms of critical, high, medium, and low. Some projects define impacts in terms of dollar values as well. If this risk occurs, this much is going to be the impact on the project in terms of dollar values. Then the next factor is probability of occurrence. How likely this risk is going to occur. We define probability in terms of percentages. 80%, 60%, 40%, 20%. Whatever we feel is the probability of occurrence, we put that number. Then based on impact and probability, we determine risk rating. Risk rating is nothing but a multiplication of these 2 factors. Higher the risk rating, more impactful is the risk. The next step is risk response strategy. In this step, we come up with a strategy to address the risk. We have 4 types of response strategies: mitigate, transfer, avoid, and accept. Mitigate is used when the risk can be mitigated by following some of the practices doing some of the activities. The transfer strategy is used where we can transfer this risk to some other party. For example, taking an insurance. So we transfer the risk onto the insurance company. Avoid strategy is used when the risk rating is very high. So we try to avoid the risk. We try to avoid that possibility at all, because in this case probability of occurrence is high and impact is also high if this risk occurs. So we try to avoid the risk. Accept is applied when the impact is not very high and probability of occurrence is also low, meaning the risk rating is low. So such risk typically we accept. This is a risk log that I have created to explain all these 4 steps in the risk management process. I have created here 4 risks as an example, and those are divided into these 4 steps. So as you can see on the left hand side, risk identification is the first step where we document the title and description of the risk. The next step is risk assessment, where we determine the impact in terms of low, medium, high, critical, and the probability of occurrence in terms of percentage values. And then a risk rating is calculated based on these 2 values. The next step is a risk response strategy. So mitigate, transfer, avoid, or accept. We pick one of those against each risk. Then the last step is response execution. So here we execute the strategy which is decided. Risk rating column here is a calculated column. It is a multiplication of impact and probability. The impact, which is low, medium, high, and critical, is translated into a number. I have assumed number 1 for low, number 2 for medium, 3 for high, 4 for critical. You can assume any number for your project, but make sure that stays constant throughout the project. Now let's talk about the differences between risk management in Agile projects and risk management in Waterfall projects. So in Agile, the first thing is risk management is everyone's job, whereas in Waterfall it was done by project manager primarily. In Agile, the risk management is an ongoing process. It's not like Waterfall where the risk identification was done in the beginning of the project. In Agile, it can be identified in any of the ceremonies or meetings like daily Scrum, sprint planning, sprint review, retrospective, or even the product backlog refinement call. In Agile, if there is a story which we cannot estimate because we're not sure whether it's technically feasible or not, we create spikes in a sprint, and using the spike we do the quick proof of concept to prove out the technology or the concept, and then if successful we pick up the story in the future sprints. That flexibility is not there in Waterfall. So for risk management, Agile gives more flexibility. It is an ongoing process, more real time. unlike waterfall where this activity is done in the beginning of the project. This concludes our video today. Thanks for watching.